Hello everyone, this is Katrina Respuesto, your second speaker about the literary theory in American literature. For the continuation, the third classic methods of psychological patterning is Gestalt and transactional theories. The theories of Erik Erikson and other eclectic psychologists are becoming important for literary criticism. The war novels of Tim Auburn show how people learn, think, and reaction depends on the fields that they are in, such as peace or combat. Next is the Metapoic. It is based primarily upon the theories of Northrop Frye, related to Jungian psychology and frequently borrowing its terminology. Metapoic criticism often goes back to Hebraic, Greek, and tribal myths, especially from the first Americans, for explanations of modern literature. This form of criticism is also heavily used in comparative literature and folklore studies. Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces is a classic in metaphoric criticism. Next is the generic. It is a critical process whereby the work of fiction is related to literary genres like the satire, the lyric poetry, the short story, and so on. This method tends to combine devices used by formalistic and historical criticism. Textual and bibliographical. The process whereby the critic analyzes and compares manuscripts, editions, deletions, revisions, and variations in order to reach conclusions regarding techniques and themes. A prime example would be the various editions of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Whitman added, modified, and deleted, and later returned various poems included in this monumental work over a period of 25 years. Media theory. It is most useful in contemporary criticism. The critic investigates the influences of non-print media upon fiction. The theories of Marshall McLuhan are important here, where the critic may discuss the impact of, let's say, television, cinema, videotape, computer programming, and other media on the work of a particular artist. Even cartoons and comic books have affected the works of, for example, Thomas Pynchon and Donald Barthelmess. In recent decades, the impact of television and film has influenced plotting and narrative structures of many popular novelists, including Jackie Collins, Harold Robbins, and Harper Lee. Next is eclectic. It is the process whereby two or more of critical approaches previously mentioned are joined to make a particular point about a novel or story. Eclecticism is a wide number of text witnesses and selecting the variant that seems best. Next is the impressionistic, a personal, original response to a work of literature based upon the reader's impressions. That is, the reader's feelings and thoughts about any aspect of the work. The response may be either aesthetic or the reaction to the shape and imagery of the work, for instance. Psychological, a reaction to the characters as persons, for instance, or any other. The emphasis is on audience response. The result of such criticism may be the appreciative essay, a valid form that is often neglected today. James August's film criticisms frequently follow this form. Next is the reader response. That is, it is a personal response to a literary work. Reader response acknowledges that all readers bring their own histories to a work. Readers interpret literary works individually. A case in point comes from Homer. When Odysseus finally arrives home disguised as a beggar, he is abused in his own place. However, Homer, to a classicist, is developing themes upon the important Greek concepts of hospitality, both as host and guest. To many American soldiers returning from World War II, and particularly the Vietnam War, the reading's impact was vastly different. A soldier returns home not only to be unrecognized, but also to be abused in his own home by his or her countrymen. Different millennia continents and wars change how literary works are interpreted. Next slide is the deconstructuralism. Takes reader response in a way to an extreme. This approach recognizes only the reader's views as valid. This extreme form of literary form acknowledged for all practical purposes, the literary work itself does not exist, only the individual reader's views about it. Only movie critics and older university teachers largely follow this approach. Next slide is the philosophical. It trends towards the other philosophical constructs may used as a means of criticizing and approaching 20th century literature. Generally, one interprets and evaluates according to the individual philosophy. Next slide is the theological. Since much fiction is theological in the broadest sense, there has been in the previous decades a return to the medieval critical approach as explained by the novelist and explorer Don J.R.R. Tolkien. During the Middle Ages, scholars could not help but notice what they observed as decidedly Christian elements in pagan and Islamic texts. They determined that since all people are descendants of Eve, everyone reveals the divine spark or the scintilla. This divine spark shines no matter how dimly in all literature. It would be difficult indeed to read a Flannery O'Connor's novels such as Wise Blood without the use of theological approach. At last, the literary movements. It is a classification approach that views a literary work as part of a historical period. The period began with a battle between two literary groups, one that called its movement New Humanism and stood for older values in judging literature, and another group that urged that old standards be overthrown and new ones adopted. The leader of the opposition, hardly a liberal himself, was the pugnacious H.L. Mencken, who insisted that the duty of writers was to present the unvarnished truth about life. Mencken helped liberate American literature from its moralistic framework. The literary movement had the biggest impact on America is the American Renaissance, also known as the Romantic period in America. This period is commonly accepted to be the greatest of American literature.